Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and today I'm excited to bring you an interview with Jen Pritchard, a financial advisor that built a virtual paraplanning business. Hearing from a virtual paraplanner is probably the most requested interview from listeners, and this interview definitely fits the bill. Jennifer got her degree in financial planning from Texas Tech University before working as a quote-unquote traditional paraplanner in a few different RIAs. She wanted to make a change and really put herself out there by ultimately cold calling different financial advisors until she found one that she really clicked with. And that advisor happened to be Trace Tisler, an XYPN member and one you've heard from on this show. After some time, they came up with the idea of Jennifer working for 4 different financial advisors all in the same mastermind group, which include Trace, Anjali, Scott Frank, and Will Kaplan, all of which have been on this show. Her story is pretty awesome, and I cannot describe how impressed I am that this group has been able to make all of this work. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/86. In addition to the typical resources, you'll find a link to our recently launched book, co-authored by Kitsis and myself, titled The Monthly Retainer Model, What It Is, Why It Works, and How to Implement It in Your Firm. This month's podcasts are brought to you by life insurance innovator Haven Life. Haven Life Insurance Agency offers the first non-commission term life insurance that your clients can buy entirely online. The prices are affordable, the application process is simple, and the policies are fully backed by Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company. Plus, some qualified, healthy applicants can even be approved for coverage without the need for a medical exam. This is life insurance the modern way. Visit havenlife.com/advisors to learn more about how Haven Life is partnering with fee-only financial advisors. Please note that the opinions expressed by participants on the podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Haven Life. Visit havenlife.com/advisors. Also be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. You can interact with other listeners, ask us questions, and more. Without further ado, here is my interview with Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I have to admit, I am as excited about this interview as I've probably been about any other interview. Not to build it up too much, but this is one I've been looking forward to having you on the show because you have one of the more unique and awesome jobs, in my opinion, in financial planning because you are like the quintessential virtual paraplanner. I'm just excited to hear your story and hear how this thing works because we've heard folks mention you on the podcast, actually, not necessarily by name, because Scott Frank, Trace Tisler, Anjali, and then Will Kaplan have all been on the show in the past, all of which you work for. So, and I believe all of them have mentioned this mythical person that they work with, that is Jennifer. So anyway, again, not to build it up too much. So, but as usual, we'll take a step back and sort of start from the beginning. So how did you sort of get into this career of financial planning?
So I actually went to Texas Tech University and they have the financial planning program there. But I didn't start out as a financial planning major. I actually started out as a math major because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I took an elective course, like a non-elective or non-major elective course in financial planning and just kind of fell in love with it and switched my second semester. And then I interned with 3 different companies while I was in school.
3 different firms?
Yes. So I got a pretty wide range of experience. My first internship was actually with Edward Jones. So I did some door knocking.
They have interns knocking on doors now. That's a new low.
So that was really interesting.
So how long were you at that internship for?
It was for 1 summer. So yeah, about 2.5 months. And then my second internship was up in Philadelphia with a life planning firm, which was really cool. And then my third one was actually with the company I ended up going and working with after I graduated college.
So 3 different internships. It sounds like 3 different firms. So for the college students out there that are listening in, do you recommend doing that many internships? I mean, was that a good call on your part?
I think it allowed me to learn a lot and learn about the industry and what I was looking for, but I do wish I would have spent at least one summer having fun. Because I didn't have a single college summer where I, just had a little part-time job and had fun. So I wish I would have done that.
Spoken like a true type A personality. So here I am. I'm like baiting you to encourage internships, and you're saying have fun, which is totally fair. If you could balance the two, I think most people have too much fun and don't do the internships, but you went the opposite direction. But it sounds like you got to see a pretty good breadth, I guess, of the industry. Because if you worked at Edward Jones at a life planning firm, like talk about two polar opposites, to be able to see it. I mean, I guess what was your impression overall doing the 3 different internships of the profession? Like, was it something that you were encouraged to get into, or was it something you just sort of were like, I got my degree in it, so I might as well stick with financial planning?
Well, there was a lot of ups and downs with doing the 3 different internships. One thing I did learn, and actually I learned this even more once I graduated and actually moved around some more, is that financial planning means something completely different to everybody. And so that was kind of interesting to learn and kind of a hard thing to learn, trying to find my place in the industry, because people would say, yes, I want you to come and do financial planning for me, but that could mean many different things. So
yeah, it's so true that it's unfortunate that we have so many different definitions of financial planning because, and that's why you start hearing these terms like life planning or wealth management. I mean, we're trying to differentiate ourselves from the other guys who say they do financial planning, but it's different than the way we do it, because we all do this thing called financial planning, and yet we all do it very differently. So, okay, so you did the 3 internships, and then you said that last internship ended up leading to a job. Was it there in Lubbock, where Texas Tech is?
It was actually in Midland, so it's about 2 hours south of that, in a small oil town that doesn't have many things to do at all.
I thought Lubbock, like when I visited Texas Tech, they bragged that they were the most rural city in the country. Like they're the furthest from any other major metropolitan. They were so proud of that fact. So if you were 2 hours from Midland, that means it must be tiny.
Yes. So, well, it's kind of an oil boom town. So when the oil is up, then there's a ton of people that live there and way too many people. But when it's down, it's kind of a small town, very conservative, a lot of CrossFit gyms and churches. So
I will not take offense to the CrossFit comment. But hey, people got to stay healthy. And so what position were you hired there for?
So I was hired as a paraplanner at that company.
Okay. And was there sort of this career path laid out for you? Like, did you have a career path there, or was it just sort of come in and work and do the job and be done?
No, there was a career path. They actually have a really good career path. The company is actually a great company, and they have a big internship program. And the career path was basically paraplanner and then associate and then financial planner and then lead. And as a paraplanner, I did a lot more like kind of back office work. And the location I was in, it was the smaller office. And so I was doing a little bit of both paraplanner and associate and admin. I was doing a lot of admin as well. So
okay. Yeah, which, from my experience, most folks that get into financial planning are never excited to actually do the admin work. It's helpful to see how it all gets done, but not what gets you out of bed in the morning. So, So how long were you with that firm then?
So I was actually only with that. So I was with them for the summer, but full time I was with them for, I believe, 6 months.
Okay.
So not very long.
Sounds like my career path. So what caused you to start looking elsewhere?
Well, there was just, first of all, the location was really hard on me. And then just timing of kind of going into kind of new office and things like that. The timing was off as far as having enough for me to do. I started looking at other places, mainly Houston, because I really wanted to get back home was the biggest thing.
All right. And so I guess what firm, did you work for a firm in Houston, or is that whenever you sort of discovered your current position?
So I did work for a firm in Houston. I moved back home and actually was a waitress for about a month and a half. And then I found a job at a company that's actually down the street from my house. And that company was primarily investment focused. And I was hired on to lead the financial planning side of the firm. And that was, again, when I learned financial planning doesn't mean the same thing to everybody.
Yep.
And so it was primarily just kind of Social Security analysis and retirement planning. And that was about it. So I quickly started looking more into the XYPN network once I found that out.
Awesome. Yeah. And I remember when I was interviewing for jobs, there were a lot of investment only firms that were sort of in that, like, we want to bring financial planning in. Like, we know there's a value. We think it'll help with client retention, but we don't really know what it is. Mm-hmm. And I just remember the culture, like talking to clients of those firms and to the advisors, the culture just seems so not planning centric that it just seemed hard to try to bring the culture of planning into a firm that was built for something else. And, transitioning all the existing clients, much less all the advisors, and it just everyone to that new mindset is tough. So for folks that are out there that are seeing some of those opportunities, I would caution you or just tell you to do an extra interview, talk to folks around just to be sure that that's the opportunity, just because it sounds like that was sort of what you ran into, was just the culture it's a strange fit. I don't know. It just doesn't fit right in a lot of instances.
Well, and it really doesn't. And it's very hard when you have someone who's been doing the same thing for 20, 30 years and they're wanting to change to kind of extend the life of their firm and kind of keep it going, but they're not willing to change.
Yeah.
And the way their fee schedule or how they charge people is set up is so different. And I was listening to the podcast at that point pretty much every single week and kind of listening to the podcast about how the fee structures that you guys promote compared to what we were doing. And he wanted no part of that. And it was just, It was kind of just philosophically just not a good fit. So.
Makes sense. All right. So how did you go about then? So you knew about the XY Planning Network. So how did you go about meeting your sort of current employers?
So I had actually found the XY Planning Network when I was at my first firm. And I think I scheduled time to talk to you because I was just trying to figure out what I can do and considered opening my own firm for about 5 seconds. And I ended up canceling my call with you because I couldn't do it financially. And so when I was at the second firm, I started looking at the website and I pretty much went through everyone's profile about 10 times that was on the Find a Planner page. Mm-hmm. And Trace Tisler actually stuck out a lot to me. First, he uses DFA, and then second, he had a picture of himself holding a chicken, which for some reason that fit. So
yep, I love it.
Contact yeah. So I put in a request to talk to him. And when we talked, it kind of just turned into more of a mentor relationship. And for the next 8 months, I talked to him on and off. And then he connected me with Scott and Anjali. And we all kind of got along and it seemed to work real well. And they were looking to hire and I was looking to find a new job. And so it kind of just worked out.
It's just amazing to me, the doors that are open whenever you're willing to take some initiative. And even just, back at, whenever you're in college, doing 3 internships, that's what opened the door, that the final internships would open the door to that first job. Even though you didn't stay there, for your entire career, it still opened the door to sort of getting your foot in the world of financial planning and just, going through and trying to find advisors that, that you can ask questions to and help connect with. It does require a little bit of initiative. It requires a little bit of legwork, but, I think the results cannot be understated. Or I guess they cannot be overstated because obviously it's worked out well. So, for folks that are out there, I think that's the one thing that I guess the common thread that runs through every interview that we do on XYPN Radio is that it's a bunch of people that took some level of, that went the extra mile, that took the extra initiative to do what was necessary. So now at this point, have you sat for your CFP? Because I'm assuming your college degree qualifies you on the educational side for the CFP.
Yes. So I actually took it last November. So, okay. November 2015.
November 2015. Okay. So were you still with one of the other firms or this is after you've started in your current role? No.
So I was at the firm here in Houston whenever I took that.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, it's so nice to get that thing knocked out. For anybody studying for it, it sucks. It just does. No one's excited to study for the CFP exam, but once you pass, you don't have to retake it. So Awesome. So talk to me a little bit about sort of the initial conversations. Obviously, you developed this relationship with Trace, and for anybody who hasn't met Trace, he is awesome. He just has a great personality, and it does not surprise me that he was holding a chicken in a picture. So how did the initial conversations start for you with, I guess, the group? So with Scott and Trace and Anjali.
So when I initially talked to Trace, I was calling to kind of ask, how do I do what you do? How do I get there financially? And we kind of went back and forth. I'm not in a place financially to start my own business, and I'm right out of college, tons of student loans, live with mom. It just wasn't going to happen. And I don't believe I have enough experience to do that because, and I thought I did at the time, but after working with the three of them, I realized I don't. And I have a lot to learn. But so I went from kind of talking to him about starting my own firm, and that changed over to, I was actually interviewing with another firm here in Houston, and it was your suit and tie firm. I would have had to drive an hour into work, kind of more traditional, but they definitely did more planning. And we were talking one day, and I was really frustrated. And I finally just said, it would be so cool if there were a couple different XY people who could hire me part-time and it would equal full-time. And he kind of light bulb went off, and he's like, well, you know what? I may have a solution for you. So it was just out of pure organic conversation. And he got me in contact with other two, and we did kind of a informal interview, like a video interview with all three of them, where I got to meet Anjali and Scott, and we all just clicked, and it kind of went from there.
So I guess we're alluding to a few things that were mentioned in previous podcasts. So just to sort of, I guess, give the full picture. So the three of them plus Will Kaplan are in a study group, and they were all very early members of XYPN. So they joined XYPN. They got in this study group. They started sort of working together and seeing, sort of similarities in their businesses. And I think that ultimately that study group, sort of those conversations rolled into hey, none of us are able to hire a full-time person, right? We're not big enough. We just haven't grown to that point. We could go out and hire a paraplanner, for 10 hours a week or something like that. But this is a unique model. This is the only time I've ever seen this where, three people basically said, okay, well, why don't we just hire one person and split them among the three of us? And usually firms are so different that that's not a reasonable thing to do. So obviously this has worked out. So y'all have found a way to do this. So you did the video interview, and then they just sort of went behind closed doors and made you an offer. I mean, kind of pulled everything together, made you an offer. Is that sort of the path?
Kind of. So Anjali was actually about to have her baby. And so she was the first person that was ready to hire me, because it was still in this kind of, they weren't sure if they were ready. They didn't know if they had enough hours for me. But with Anjali having her baby, she was going to have enough hours for me, at least for her portion of it. So I actually started working with her first. And then after about, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, the other two decided that they were ready to bring me on as well. But I didn't quit my full-time job until the other two were on board, because I needed a guarantee that I would get my at least 30 hours a week from them before I was willing to quit my job and kind of go the business owner route. So,
all right. So Anjali was the first one to grab you, but they were willing to commit that, 30 hours a week, in order to get you to leave your job?
Yes.
So did you start working for all three of them at once, or you just sort of slowly started with Anjali and then went from there?
I started with Anjali, and Anjali got me set up in all the technology, which made it a lot easier when I started working for Scott and Trace. But once I started working for Scott and Trace, then it was just all three of them at the same time, when we were just figuring it out as we went.
Yeah, no, that's so awesome. So did you establish an RIA or a business entity at all, and then they hired you, or are you an employee of the firm? I guess what's the legal structure that y'all went with?
So in 2016, I started an LLC, and so they hired me on as contract worker. Okay. And I was paid on an hourly basis. But as of this year, I'm actually an employee.
Okay. So, yeah, and I've heard this done a couple different ways. For folks that are looking at starting a virtual paraplanning business, I remember when I went through this, that compliance sometimes is easier if you have an RIA, but it's also, whereas you would have started an LLC and then you register as an RIA, and then they're outsourcing to the RIA, and it has something to do with the agreements where it's easier to sub-advise some of the work. I can't speak to all of that, but I don't know. It depends on the type of work you're doing and whether or not that's necessary, because I'm assuming in this instance you aren't registered as an IAR of any of their RIAs in 2016, correct? You're just a contractor.
That's correct. So because I don't have the CFP and I haven't taken the 65, I'm not registered. Yep. So I'm not in any kind of advice giving capacity. Gotcha. So they were able to hire me on as purely contract work, where I wasn't giving any advice to people.
Okay. So what type of technology is the group using? So do each of these three advisors, and before we started recording, you had mentioned that you just started working for Will Kaplan as well. So now you have the four of them. Like, are they all four using different technology, or are they all using the same stuff?
They're all using the same stuff for the most part. There are some differences, but as far as like the CRM and the planning software, those are both the same across the board. And email, that's the same.
Has that helped, I guess, as you've been coming on board with the other advisors? Is it helping for you to do your job more effectively if everybody's sort of using the same tech stack?
Yes, it helps a lot. We meet once a week as a group, so we're trying to streamline it where everyone's pretty much doing the same thing so that I can do the same thing no matter who I'm working for. So especially the CRM, having everyone on the same CRM really helps because we can create workflows and processes that I can use no matter who I'm working with.
Very cool. So I guess it's a hard thing to ask for, but like if you were running a virtual paraplanning business for advisors that weren't in a study group together and therefore willing to go the extra mile to make your life easier, I mean, I wonder, would your recommendation be that, you only work with folks that are using very similar tech stacks, or do you think it's possible to work, with folks using different CRMs or different planning tools, or would that just be way too, across the board, I guess, way too chaotic?
I think it works. I do know there's another paraplanner that I know, a virtual paraplanner that I know, that I think he works with people who they don't work together. And so he has to work with different CRMs and different planning softwares. So I think it can work. I think it makes it more difficult. I don't think you have the same amount of capacity as I do working with people who have the same tech stack, but I think it is possible.
So does it feel at this point like you're almost just sort of working for one advisor instead of for four, if they're all using sort of same technology and similar processes? Is it sort of plug and play as you move between the advisors? It
is. I mean, right now I feel like I'm working for one firm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's what's unique about this. Like I've heard the virtual paraplanning model of, I work for 4 different firms and they all have different CRMs and different processes and different things, like, which just sounds like a nightmare to keep track of. Like, is this the advisor that likes it this way? Or is this the one that has this one piece of technology that I only log into once a quarter or whatever? Like, it's awesome that you get to sort of continue using the same pieces. So,
right. Well, and they still have a lot of differences between all of them, but it's not technology based. It's more of a preference based and how they are used to doing things, and communication style as well is very different between all of them. So there's still some things that I have to learn based on who I'm working with. But as far as technology goes, it's pretty seamless.
That's a great point. There are a lot of differences, so it just takes one of the differences off, which is what types of systems you're using. So, and I guess just real quick, what technology are they using in their firm? So, what's their CRM planning software and sort of other major tools?
So we use Redtail for our CRM, and then eMoney, which eMoney is really nice because it allows them. I only have one login with eMoney because all they have to do is share their clients with me, so I don't have to worry about signing in 3 or 4 different times. And then what else? I know Orion. They're all the same custodian. What
so probably TD Ameritrade would be my guess. Yep. Okay. Yeah. All right. Awesome. So similar technology. What about the actual processes that they're using for the tasks that they're handing off to you? Are they pretty similar at this point?
We're getting there. So that's a big part of my job, actually, is creating those processes and then making sure they are following them is a big part of my job.
That sounds about right.
But it's a work in progress. I mean, we will set up a workflow and then we realize 2 days later we need to change it. So, and I think that just comes with being newer firms and figuring out how to work together.
Okay, so maybe it'd be easier to go back to when you first started working for Anjali. I guess, how had the processes evolved? How did she onboard you and then, I guess, hand you processes?
So with Anjali, it was more project-based when I first started. So it was, hey, can you do some research here? She showed me like her cash flow Excel spreadsheet and would teach me some things, and then I'd go off and do it. So at first it was a lot of processes. And then I spent the first probably month working with all 3 of them, just getting data organized as far as documents go and things like that. So the first couple months was a lot of just getting organized. And then as we did that, we started creating processes. There weren't a whole lot of processes in place when I started. So I have been kind of creating the processes as we go. I mean, I've been I think I kind of pushed them to create processes because they didn't really have any before me.
Yeah.
Not to make me sound.
No. The beauty of being an entrepreneur, it's tough to, I don't know, it's just tough to get all that done. I mean, you have so many things going on that processes are the last thing you think about. And honestly, most firms start the process building part once they hire somebody, because it's the most effective way to actually have you doing your job and be sure you're doing it the way that needs to be done, is that you start to document the steps. So I guess, what is your process with them for documenting a process? I mean, how does it go from, hey, this is something I generally just do on my own, to, okay, this is something now Jennifer can take and implement and do regularly?
So what we've been doing is, as Scott kind of says, we don't want to do something and just do it once. We want to do it and then be able to do it 1,000 more times. So I've been working on, if I do something, I create a workflow within Redtail, and then I present it to them the next week. So a lot of it is more of as I go and I realize, hey, this could be a process, I go in and create it within our CRM and then just present that to them. And like I said, we're constantly changing things as we go, but getting that base process in place is important.
Have you been given the authority to say, like, hey, you're not following the process, like, follow the process? Are you getting to that point? Because I just feel like that's going to be important. If, as an entrepreneur, I understand I don't want to follow the process, but I have to, otherwise my team wants to kill me. So
yes. And they all know, and I'll say it, and then I'll be like, I'm sorry if I'm coming off bad, but we just have to follow this. So, and they all know. And the thing is what I usually do is, if someone has an issue with the process, I say, okay, I'm going to write this down and let's talk about it on the group level on Monday. So it's not just like one person making the decision. We do talk about it as a group, and they do let me kind of push them and remind them that they need to follow the processes. Sure. But
so where do you find the hangups in terms of following the process are? Just different preferences on the way things are done, or just they use systems differently? I guess what are the issues that have arisen in this type of case? I
think it's just kind of personal preference, and then also habits that they've built at their prior firms, I think have carried over. Sense. Even though they're young planners, they have been in the industry for, I want to say, 10 years. And so they've created habits. They're all different. So kind of getting them on the same process and having them doing the same thing has been difficult just because of that. And then just personal preference. And then also just figuring out things don't work with certain ways that we set things up.
So, and I guess that's the iterative process that fascinates me, because it's not something I'm very good at, is this whole okay, so you do the initial mapping out, and are you using any particular software, or are you just using sort of Redtail's built-in workflows? Pretty
much Redtail. I actually will usually type it out in Word before, just so I can, understand it, and then I'll enter it into our CRM.
I've seen a couple different ways of doing this, and it just sort of depends on the way that you think. I know a lot of people do Word. That's actually how I do it. Mm-hmm. I've seen others that do it visually, like with Glyphy, which is it's almost like PowerPoint, like little smart icons where you can sort of connect them, and it's like a visual flow chart. Some people think more like that. There's different, or it's almost like mind mapping. So there are different ways of doing this. So you do it in Word, and then you're sort of putting it into Redtail and then testing it, sort of run through it and see where it breaks.
Pretty much. If we find it, there's been a couple workflows that I've had to go back and change, 2 or 3 times, just because we realized, there was a step that should have been in there that wasn't in there, or we need to move this step to step 2 instead of step 4, just based on practice and doing it.
Sure. Is it documented to the point that I could log into Scott's system and follow a process and actually do it for him? Is it literally, somebody who from outside the firm who has no idea how the process works? Is it documented to that level of click here, click there, do this? Or is it a little higher level?
It's probably a little bit higher level, but we're hoping the goal for this year is to focus on those processes. And so hopefully by the end of 2017, you'd be able to go in and know exactly what to do.
All right. Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the issues that people try to take on too much, right? Like every workflow, they initially want it to be every single click, which I understand. And that's probably a good workflow. But I like the way y'all are doing it, where you sort of outline it, run through it, test it, be sure it actually works, because you can get so detailed and then it doesn't actually work because you put step 4 where step 2 should have been, and just sort of iteratively work on that. So, how much of your job at this point then is the documentation of the workflows as opposed to actually getting in there and doing the actual work?
I wouldn't say it's a big portion. I don't know, it's kind of hard to put a number on it. I mean, some weeks it's like all I do, and then the other weeks I don't do any of it. So, I mean, it's just kind of depending on whenever we have a lot of client stuff going on, I can't focus as much on creating workflows and things like that. But the idea is that as we do things, I'm creating workflows as we go. But I also do a lot of other things and just create the processes. So I would say probably 35% of my time is spent on processes.
Yeah. And that's a huge undertaking. I mean, that's, and I guess the expectation is generally that the firm owner would be the one documenting, but this works because especially if that's how your brain thinks, and the way that you operate, which for many of us is not the way we naturally operate, is not in process land. But if it's the way you do, then you're probably best suited for doing that.
Yeah. Well, and it helps a lot because I'm the type of person where I have to know why we're doing what we're doing. So the fact that I'm coming up with, the process, that means I know exactly why we're doing it. Then it works really well.
And can push back when you're seeing errors and holes.
Yeah.
And I love it. I remember, my first boss, Rick, he and I would say something to a client and, come back and the operations team would be like, can't say that. Like, we can't actually do that, and they were always the ones that were calling our, bluff on. And we thought, of course you can get money out of that illiquid REIT in 3 days, and it's like, no, that's not how that works. And so they were the ones that actually knew how everything operated. We were just the ones telling folks about it, which sounds like your role as well. So extremely powerful. And this is one of the pieces out there for young financial planners is that, when we talk about financial planning, we always have a lead planner mentality, right? Like everyone goes and they become a paraplanner and an associate advisor and then a lead planner. And I'm not saying that that's not necessarily your path and you may want to become a lead planner one day, but there are folks out there that are just really freaking good at operations and management and processes. And those folks are harder to find. Professional management for RIAs is actually harder to find than advisors, which are already hard enough. So, for the folks out there that are like, meeting with clients is, and actually being the one doing all of the hand holding and communication and all of that isn't really my thing. But I think financial planning is really cool and a really valuable service offering. This is a fantastic career path and a direction to go because it's extremely valuable. It's necessary for a growing firm that wants to scale, to have folks like you running, kind of running the internals.
Well, and I for sure want to be an advisor, but it's not that I necessarily like doing the processes, but I need them to work. And so it's more of a kind of like, I can't function without processes. It's just very hard for me. And I think I know Scott likes the processes a lot too. And it makes things more efficient and it makes it being virtual and being that I can't just walk down the hall and talk to them. We have to have the processes in place. And so I think it's just kind of that's what pushes me to kind of be more focused on that.
That's a fair point. So do you feel like because you're virtual, you need more processes than if you were in their office?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And that's a great recommendation for the advisors out there that either work virtually with their clients or are hiring virtual staff that maybe they need to focus more on the processes and process building before they're actually hiring someone. So in terms of sort of setting this up, I mean, again, you're sort of in a unique situation because you sort of came into this with a couple of advisors and working for everyone at once. But for the folks out there that are thinking like, I want to get experience in financial planning. I want to be able to work in financial planning, but we don't really have advisory firms where I live. And, maybe virtual paraplanning is the way to go. I guess, what do those folks need to do to sort of go down this path that you've taken? I guess, what recommendations do you have for them?
That's kind of a hard one because I actually know quite a few people who are interested in doing what I'm doing. And some of the difficulties that they're running into is, most advisors only want to hire for 10 hours a week and they're not, the pay is a little bit on the lower end. And so it's hard to find that perfect mix like I did. And I guess the biggest thing is you have to be willing to take a chance. I went from having a push salary to getting paid hourly and only guaranteed 30 hours a week. So I would say knowing who you want to work for as far as like philosophies and things like the typical, what you would tell anybody is knowing who do you want to work for and then being willing to kind of make that jump and leap of faith that it'll work out. I mean, it's kind of the same idea as opening your own business. I mean, that's pretty much what I did. But definitely finding people before you make that jump that can kind of make up the hours you need before you do make that jump, I think is a big thing.
It's a great point that you're starting your own business. This is not going and taking a job and getting a salary. So even if, even with a guaranteed 30 hours a week, right? Like you started your own business, and I'm assuming like you're getting paid from 3 or even 4 different people, and you're having to do your own bookkeeping, which, does that sound accurate? Like those are all the things that you're having to do is basically run your own little business? Pretty
much. And that was all in 2016. I'm W-2 now, so it's a little bit different. But yeah, for all of 2016, I did my own, like calculated all my own expenses, mileage, all that kind of stuff. So
those are the parts of running a business that make you never want to be a business owner.
Yes.
It's like, now, was this meal for, expensable or not? We had this happen because we're a partnership, XYPN. Like if we buy a meal for our team, we can deduct it. If Kitsis and I, because we're owners, ate, then we can only deduct 50% of that, I think. So it's like tracking all those little things and like literally writing on a receipt, this was Alan's meal and this was Michael's meal. It's like, oh my gosh, but necessary to keep the tax man happy.
Yes.
Or yourself happy, because otherwise it's deduction. So you get to pay less taxes if you get to write things off. So yeah, I think that this is fascinating because, again, and this is why I was so excited to hear how you're doing this, because I wonder if there's an opportunity. I know it's hard to find or to build this, but like, I think you've built the ideal scenario, which is, working for 3 or 4 different advisors that have very similar technology, if not the exact same, and similar processes. Now, not everyone's going to be in a study group together and willing to meet weekly and let you tell them what process they're going to follow because someone else, really likes their process this way. But streamlining it to the point that it doesn't feel like you're working for, 4 different companies and it almost feels like 4 different industries because they're just so different.
Well, and I would say that if you are going to work with multiple different companies like that don't work together, then coming up with your own processes, and I think is a big thing, coming to those firms with your own processes and saying, this is how I do things. Do you want to work with me? I mean, that's probably the easiest way if you are going to be working with multiple firms that you have different, service offerings and technology and all that kind of stuff.
I think that's a great point, because then it's more of an outsource then, as opposed to, bringing someone onto the team to do their process. But then you could say, hey, look, this is the way I do planning. This way I know how to do it. I'm super efficient. If you want me to run your process, it's going to take 2 or 3 times as long. So, most business owners are going to prefer to pay you less for less hours and let you be more efficient. So now, when you went out on your own, how did you handle things like benefits and that sort of stuff? I guess you're still young enough you can stay on parents' health insurance and that sort of thing. Or were you able to go out and just get insurance on the exchange? Or
no, so I'm young enough that I got to stay on my dad's insurance, and I have 2 very young siblings, so it didn't cost him anything to keep me on the insurance. So that was nice. And then, none of the others, I didn't really have very many benefits at my prior firm, so I didn't lose a whole lot.
Yeah, it's a very common question for folks that are going on their own. It's like, how do you do health insurance? Like, I get mine on the exchange because, we really don't have any other options in Montana, but nice if you're young enough to stay on parents' insurance. So awesome. Well, as we're sort of wrapping up, I guess my famous last question, and famous to me only, if you think about sort of the younger Jennifer that not too long ago, but was looking at, maybe breaking away and doing this virtual thing and whatnot, if there's one thing that you wish you had known then that you sort of learned over the course of time, what do you think the one piece of advice would be that you'd go back and give yourself?
Probably to ask more questions. That's something, and that's probably more back to college, Jennifer. Yeah. Is just to ask more questions, listen more, just be more aware of what you're getting yourself into. Just it comes down to asking questions.
Yeah, it's easy to be sold, on whether it be the vision for where the company's going. And that's where, I lament a lot about the unsigned promises of ownership that a lot of young planners get. And it really does come down to the fact that we can get sold on, come in and in 5 years you take over the firm. And you're like, hey, you know what? Come to find out, if I'd asked more questions, I'd have found out you've been saying that for 15 years to 4 different people and you still hadn't sold the firm. So maybe not the best call. But And it can be tough, especially when you're young and you're looking for that job that it feels like you've got to go get a job and you've just got to take the opportunity that's in front of you. But one of the things about financial planning is there's just so much opportunity out there. We are so desperate for young planners that, for the young planners out there, you can be patient. There are jobs for you, I promise.
Yes,
I don't know unemployed financial planners. Like they're just not out there. But there's so many opportunities that it's okay to be patient, and really wait until the right thing comes along. And if it doesn't come along, you can build it just like you've done, which is sort of build your own little business, that I'm assuming allows you to work from home or at least live in the city that you want to live in and do the type of work you want to do, working with the clients you want to work with. Like, I think that's just such an awesome example of building your great life and staying really focused on that. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today and sharing your experiences. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
This month's podcasts are brought to you by life insurance innovator Haven Life. Haven Life Insurance Agency offers the first non-commission term life insurance that your clients can buy entirely online. The prices are affordable, the application process is simple, and the policies are fully backed by Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company. Plus, some qualified, healthy applicants can even be approved for coverage without the need for a medical exam. This is life insurance the modern way. Visit havenlife.com/advisors to learn more about how Haven Life is partnering with fee-only financial advisors. Please note that the opinions expressed by participants on the podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Haven Life. Visit havenlife.com/advisors. Be sure to join our VIP community at XYPlanningNetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to XYPlanningNetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.